Hello and welcome back to Elder Futhark Rune Divination 101. Today we will be discussing the rune Naudiz, the rune of necessity. As always, there are a few messages that I relay to my viewers. First off, a few of you have requested certain other videos about certain other topics. Once again, I'd like to reiterate, I have not forgotten about it. I would simply like to get to Yira, which is going to be 2 runes after this, which means that we'll first be discussing Naudiz today. Next time we'll be discussing Isa, and after that we will be discussing Yira. Before I start making different videos, because Yira is kind of the halfway point. It's the 12th rune of the 24 runes. So, you know, for my own sake, I would like to just finish halfway and then make a few other videos before continuing with the other 12 runes, so as to you know, take a little break from making rune videos, but at the same time also you know, making videos on other spiritual, paranormal stuff that I kind of have been wanting to do for a while now. Basically, videos that I wanted to you know, make because someone requested this specifically about you know, being a shamanism, stuff like that. What it is and what it isn't, you know, all that kind of stuff, because there's so much stuff out there these days about, you know, people claiming to be shamans and all that stuff, and I get it's the popular thing. So, you know, it's, yeah, something I just kind of wanted to discuss, and this viewer of mine actually just motivated me to speak about that. Because there are a few things these days that are just, you know, they kind of need to be discussed, if you get what I mean. Other than that, I have been wanting to, you know, make a video on spirit allies, on befriending spirits, on working with spirits, on, you know, stuff what is sometimes referred to as spirit keeping. To clarify, it is not, you know, capturing spirits and, you know, invoking them and then, you know, enslaving them or something. I'm talking about actually, you know, asking for a spirit's assistance. They come to you, and then you have them bound by their own, you know, by their own will. So they actually allow you to bind them to you. And this is something that I have kind of wanting to have been wanting to discuss, have been wanting to make a video on. Other than that, I have been considering making videos on, you know, Norse gods, Germanic gods. In particular, the ones who are not that well known, such as, you know, Skadi or the Norns, Valkyries, you know, Hodor, the brother of Balder. You know, the god of darkness, stuff like that. Because, you know, we always hear stuff about Odin and Tyr and Thor and Frey and Freya, and that's obviously, you know, because they're very popular gods and were very popular gods back in the day. Major gods, but I also feel it would, you know, be just to do some of my own, you know, do some videos on them, share with you guys my own input on them, my own research, and as always, such videos will be an expansion of my own knowledge, you know, so because I have to research, make sure all my information, all my ideas, they're all correct, just like I do with the runes, and, you know, to meditate on it and then share that what I have found with you guys, because, you know, I greatly enjoy expanding my knowledge, expanding my my wisdom on these matters. So that being said, let's move on to starting this rune video on, like I said, Naudiz, the rune of necessity. So yeah, this rune means necessity, it means want, it means compulsion, it means need, craving, but also at the same time deprivation of all these things. The literal translation of the rune is need. Naudiz means need. Our modern day letter equivalent is the N, as in now or not. The astrological sign associated with it is usually Capricorn, and the associated element is fire. The associated goddess is Skuld. She's the quote-unquote youngest of the three Norns. She's the Norn of the future. So, yeah. She is also sometimes depicted as a Valkyrie or Valkyrie, however you want to pronounce it, in the old poems. And like I said, I'm going to be doing way down the line when I'm finished with my rune videos. I'm going to be doing a series on Norse gods and stuff, and we will eventually be discussing the three Norns, among them being Skuld. So, Naudiz, what does it mean to what does it mean to us? What are the meanings of Naudiz other than the the words that describe it? Naudiz, being the rune of necessity, it means many things in many different contexts. It is a rune that symbolizes a lack of capabilities on our part of doing something. It means restraint. It means being tied down in some way, shape, or form. And it means having to sit through it. Sit out the restraint, sit out the bondage, sit out the the adversity that is currently on your path. It is also the wisdom and the knowledge to let whatever is happening, knowing that you have no direct control over it, to just let it happen, to deal with it the best way possible, to basically make the most of a crappy situation, if you want to put it like that. Going with the flow with a touch of coercion involved, basically. Because, like I said, it is a necessity. It is something that you cannot usually directly change. And usually, Naudiz is a lesson of some sort. It is a lesson you need to learn to spiritually advance, to grow wiser, grow more knowledgeable, grow more powerful even. Sometimes people or spirits, well, spirits are people, but they do things with you or to you that might seem a bit harsh at first, but there's always a lesson, whether the spirit's intent or the person's intent is malevolent. There's always a lesson for you to learn from that, even if the lesson is just so simple as to never become like this person, so you start messing with other people. There is a concept of your freedom being limited in some way sometimes, just being placed under restrictions or a form of punishment in some way, shape, or form. All these things are, like I said, however, for your growth, for your benefit. That's usually the message that is brought with Naudiz. It is a harsh rune like Hagalas, but it is also, it is to help you grow, basically. That is the message usually. However, as opposed to Hagalas, Hagalas being the challenge itself, the hailstorm that batters down on you, that hurts you, that inconveniences you. Now this represents your personal limitations in such a situation. Now this represents your own bondage, your own incapability at this present time to effectively break out of a situation. So imagine being in a car and a storm is raging, the storm being Hagalas. Your inability to deal with the storm effectively and having to, pull over, waiting out the storm, that is what Naudiz represents. Naudiz is the constraint, Naudiz is the necessity, and it is also at the same time your want, your desire, your compulsion, your craving to, break out of the situation, to not be hindered anymore. But in order for you to do this, you either have to be patient, just wait it out, or you have to find a way that makes you grow in such a way that you are now capable of handling driving in the storm, for example. So all in all, even though Naudiz can be inconvenient to extremely painful depending on the situation, it is a lesson that we need to learn, or a series of lessons that we need to learn in order for us to grow, to evolve, to develop, whatever you want to call it. Lastly, Naudiz is a rune that calls to us to just, let the past be the past. There's nothing you can do to change it. The past has already been spun by that specific norm. The present is currently being spun, which is where your current influence is, and that is a very valuable lesson that we will see when we discuss this rune, Naudiz. You dictate how you learn your lesson. You dictate how you deal with the situation. Are you going to be patient? Do you learn patience from it? Is there something you can do about it? Or is there something you can learn to do about it to break free from the constraint? Is there something you can do that will allow you to cope with it at the very least? Then do so, like that is what decides your present, and at the same time, of course, as a direct result of that, what will affect any future happenings that might have to deal with the situation that you're currently dealing with. There's an element of learning, there's an element of limitation, there is an element of sometimes punishment, there is an element of sometimes just having no clue what's going on and how to cope with things. And sometimes there can even be an element of hopelessness involved, but it is always, at the end of the day, a lesson, no matter how you're feeling about the particular lesson being learned at this point. In other words, in short, Naudiz, however constraining it might be, it allows us to shape our future. So we now come to the actual meaning of the rune in divination. Naudiz upright is what we will be discussing first, and I would have to make a little annotation here that for some people, Naudiz, due to the way it can be drawn or carved or shaped, for some people is not reversible, because as you noticed, Naudiz looks like this. There is a sort of a cross look to it, with the horizontal line actually going more like this rather than just completely horizontal. Now, personally, I am a believer of Naudiz being reversible, because I tend to make my Naudiz rune with the horizontal line a little further upwards, so that when you reverse it, it basically becomes an upside down cross with it. So there is a, excuse me, I'm not a native English speaker, I'm not sure if this would still be considered horizontal, but yeah, forgive me for that. So basically, there are people who think Naudiz is reversible depending on how you draw it, and that is very true. If you draw it, with the horizontal line exactly in the middle, it will not be reversible, because it will look exactly the same upside down as it does upright. It will only be able to be converse or upright. So, because I believe that Naudiz is reversible, and for the sake of the people who do also want to believe this, I will be adding the reverse meaning to it, to this video. But first, Naudiz upright. So in this position, Naudiz means that you are, as discussed, facing challenges, issues, maybe even stagnation of some sort, to test your resolve, if you will, to test your patience, your morals, any other aspect of your personality, of your ego, of your your being, of your resources, of whatever you have. Maybe this will be exactly the reason why it's happening, because you don't like it, because you don't want it. It could be considered a test of sorts. It could be considered a test of character, a test of the things that I mentioned before. However, it could also simply mean that someone else decided to be a nasty person, and that they just, for some reason or another have authority over you and they decide to mess with you. It could mean that it might just be the natural world, like I said, the example of a hailstorm that we have discussed in Hagalas as well. Um, Such a, restrained, constraining, confining situation is what you will have to cope with when Naudiz shows up. And again, unlike Hagalas, which is the actual situation itself, Naudiz is your personal restraint, your personal inability to do much about it. Naudiz upright is the challenges that are presented to us. It is in the terms of, in the context of doing a rune reading for someone, it is the questions usually posed by the querent about a specific topic, which will be containing an element of restraint on either their part or on the part of someone that is involved with them in some way, shape, or form, as we will see in the examples. You know, it is, however, never advisable, just like with Hagalas, that start making them freak out, however, because now this is, like I said, a bunch of lessons that need to be learned, and therefore, at the end of the day, the individual, the querent, or the person that is associated with them, which this rune is about, will grow stronger for it if they successfully pass the challenge. And you should look at it this way, and you should probably also clarify this to the querent, that everyone has challenges in their lives. Everyone has issues that they need to face. Everyone has weaknesses. Everyone has situations that they don't like dealing with. So, if it freaks someone out to see such runes like Naudiz or Hagalas, they probably shouldn't be asking for divination in the first place, because they quite clearly can't handle anything bad being told to them. And that's always up to you, up to your discretion as a reader, obviously. But people generally don't like hearing bad news when you do divination for them. The good news of the bad news is always that it will allow you, now that you know what might be coming if you continue on this road, to, change things. It is always advisable to advise the querent to, remain calm, collected, look to the surrounding runes. What is the issue that they're facing? Because now this in and of itself doesn't really tell you much about the specific issue. You need to look at the context, at the surrounding runes, listen to the story of the querent, and to your own intuition, obviously, about what the issue is that they're facing, and where and how and when the upheaval, the hurdles in the road are going to appear. And based on these things together, you can adequately and accurately advise them on their challenges ahead, or possible challenges ahead, because nothing is ever set in stone, as we have discussed many times. I feel that taking an attitude, which is something you would do well to relay to your querents, to your customers if you do paid readings or whatever, to always relay to them that an attitude of acceptance, in the terms that challenges are there for everyone. Accept that you can get through it, accept that you are learning something from it, and take such a mindset towards take such a stance towards the issues at hand. Never go ahead and mope and throw temper tantrums or whatever, because it's not going to get you anywhere. It's going to make learning the lesson harder. And there's the old saying that a lesson will repeat itself until it is learned. I'm not very sure if that's always the case, but when it comes to Naudiz, because they're usually about personal constraints, about personal issues about personal feelings of helplessness, powerlessness, inability to move or act, I feel that is very much the case, because your own personal limitations are the ones that you set for yourself, or that you impose on yourself in a mental sense, you know. Now this upright, the example that I would give for it. Suppose that you have a querent, a man, who comes to you, and he is in the process of divorcing his wife, or at least considering doing so. Now he has two kids, which he loves very much. The two kids are underage, so they're dependent on parents, and but he decides that he can, for whatever reason, no longer remain in a relationship with his wife. Now, he obviously wishes the best for his children. I say obviously, but let's assume that he does. And it is, however, unfortunately for him, not very likely that he's going to get custodianship of the children. So he comes to you for a reading on this matter, and he basically is searching for advice on what to do. You cast the runes. Naudiz appears as the future rune, for example. And when you ask about him pursuing the path of the divorce, because he's not yet going through with it, let's assume that, and he's, considering the idea, strongly considering the idea. So notice upright in the future. This is the path he is going to choose. So you do the spread, you see Naudiz appear in the future. And this means that, he will not be able to control everything. There is a degree of constraint involved. There are matters that are not within his control, such as, a court decision based on the custodianship, like who gets the children. Basically, it will tell you that he will not get everything he desires. He won't be able to divorce and get a new wife, and at the same time, keep his children in his custodianship. It's likely not going to be possible. So notice upright will symbolize all these different things. It is constraint in general. There are many, many things in this case that are out of his control, but that he can learn to, mentally cope with, that he can learn how to handle. He can eventually come to terms with it and say, hey, at least I get to visit my kids like every weekend, or they get to visit me, or, at least I can now pursue, once I've healed, once I've taken time to myself and reflect on what went wrong in my marriage after I get the divorce. What went wrong? What can I do better? What kind of woman should I look for in the future? That kind of stuff. It's just something that he's going to have to learn to cope with. These are things that are out of his control, but that are at the same time within his control in the terms of how he reacts to them. So, it also represents that sometimes difficult choices, not getting everything he wants, are called for. That is also something that Naudiz represents, because remember, Naudiz means need. In his case, he is considering the divorce for a reason. He feels that he just doesn't want to be with this specific woman anymore for whatever reason, even though he has kids with her. And he really wants out. So he needs to make this decision. He's no longer happy. He leaves. And he's just not going to get everything that he wants. He's going to have opposition. He's going to have restraint. He's going to have a craving and a need for certain things that will not entirely be fulfilled. That's just the way life is. That's just what happens. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary. And especially in situations that need to be let go of, you need to just do away with certain things in order for you to move on to, to fresh ground, or to a fresh new start, or whatever. And eventually, he will find increased happiness, renewed motivation, new love life, hopefully continued contact with his children. So, in a spiritual context, to me personally, Naudiz upright, it symbolizes ego death. It symbolizes, you know, suffering. It symbolizes our internal struggles, our internal suffering, our internal constraints, the parts that we need to let go of, the parts that we need to let die of our old selves, basically, because we become new people every day, every minute, every second. We get new ideas. We are no longer the same person we were 2 minutes ago because we have learned other things. You know, it is death, it is regeneration, it is rebirth into a new, better, improved self, breaking free from the constraints, as it were. It's like a, you know, like a snake shedding its skin, for example. We shed old habits, we shed negative traits, we replace them with newer, better ones. And in a spiritual, shamanic perspective, this is actually also true in, for example, entity removal, or what you would call astral parasites, negative entities, quote-unquote demons, if you will. You know, that have attached themselves to us because we have excessive, you know, indulgences or excessive uh, negative emotions that we harbor deep down that we're just not ready to let go of, and that become a, you know, a feeding ground for certain negative energies, like, for example, excessive pride or excessive rage, or you know, those kinds of things. Like, you continuously harbor this massive anger inside of you from something that happened like 20 years ago, and you're just not letting go of it. That is likely to attract certain energies that want to, you know, have a piece of the pie, basically. And in this sense, it is easy to let go of such entities, as long as you let go of the issues. For example, like I said, if you have excessive rage, you need to look at what is causing the rage. It's likely a trauma of some sort. Perhaps, you know, you were severely bullied, or you were abused, or something happened some time ago where you became extremely upset and you started just feeling all this anger. This is a restraint as well, you know. This is something that just locks you in your own mind. It is something that blocks out positive things. It is something that doesn't let love in, the happiness and being free from all these, you know, all these hateful thoughts, all these negative thoughts that you have, and it just becomes more and more because you feed it with every act of rage. It is a perpetual cycle. I think we discussed this like all the way back in the first aid, in rooms like Raido and Feihu and stuff like that. Acquiring of certain things, cycles, everything being connected. So basically, it is, you know, in a spiritual context, it is that restraint that you have. But yeah, in short, basically, you have constraints spiritually, whether it be religious beliefs that are no longer serving you, whether it be emotions that are long overdue of being let go of, for events that no longer matter, that simply just exist here and no longer anywhere else. You know, those kind of things. I'm aware it's not always that easy. You know, uh, going for my BA in psychology, I know how traumas work. I know how that can fester in people's minds. It is obviously not so simple as just letting go, but what I'm saying is, you have to work on that part of yourself. It's not an easy process. It's likely that, in fact, if you start working on such things, that all that is going to just come boiling over. It's going to spill over. It's going to feel very unpleasant, and I think that's the reason why a lot of people actually don't really want to face their, well, demons, if you will, quote unquote. And sometimes, you know, you come into conflict with people who point out your negative traits. Sometimes you have a spouse or friends or family that point out certain things to you about yourself that you may not even have been aware of. It might be a matter of either pride on your part that you're not willing to recognize it, or it could just be that the other person might be overreacting, and you have to decide whether or not their complaint about you is justified. And there is, of course, always prudence required. It's not just because someone tells you that you have this or that issue that it's necessarily true. It could just be their perception of you. But care needs to be taken in that it does not become a constraint in and of itself, that you get to be afraid of other people's judgments of you. That in and of itself would be a constraint, a something that is going to cause a lot of need and compulsion in you for you to adhere to the opinions of others, which is definitely not a place where you want to be at. So, prudence is always called for when you're examining yourself and you're trying to improve yourself, because not everything everyone says about you is justified. It could be that they're, reflecting their own issues on you. It could be their problem, basically, that they're just projecting on you. So, Naudiz converse. What does Naudiz converse mean in a rune reading? It tends to mean that one's desires have hidden dangers. In a similar way to Hagalaz's converse meaning. However, the difference here might be that it will not be so much an outside influence, but that the hidden dangers will have a negative effect on ourselves, or perhaps that it will come from within us. A self-imposed lesson through stupidity or carelessness, like you do something which you knew you probably shouldn't have done, but you wanted to do it anyway, which is where the compulsion aspect of Naudiz comes in. And you just, you do it anyway, and you then reap what you sow, basically. You do something stupid that you really wanted to do, knew you shouldn't have, but do it anyway, and you get, what you bargained for, basically. The desire one has and its effects aren't always known to you. Like, you can do one thing, it might seem like a good idea on the surface, but at the same time, there could be hidden dangers either to yourself or to other people. It could be that engaging in something that seems harmless on the surface might actually be hiding a potential danger to you. Always discuss with yourself to always think very thoroughly and carefully, what is it that I want? Why do I want it? What will the effects be? And not with just yourself, but also those that might potentially be involved with the situation. And this, of course, obviously also goes for the person that you're doing a rune reading for. So it can also mean that one needs to beware of a demand being placed, either by oneself or by other people. They may hide hidden intent or meaning in some way, shape, or form. Meaning to say that if, for example, you want to do something and someone else is telling you not to do it, they might have a reason to tell you not to do it because they have something to hide, depending on the context. It might mean that you'll discover something that is not going to be very helpful to you, or will hurt another person, stuff like that. I mean, this is a very vague description, but like I said, it could mean pretty much anything. We'll see an example of it after this. However, lastly, in matters of love, it could simply actually imply that you might have a secret admirer. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a negative rune in this sense. It could mean that you are being admired by someone in love, or perhaps you have an admirer in the sense of someone who admires what you do, someone who admires your work or admires your art or your music, or you know what I mean. So it could mean any and all of those things. It is, in other words, a cautionary rune in this position, and not so much a call to learn a lesson and notify you of a constraint in and of itself. It is a cautionary rune that warns you against, or warns you of, makes you alert of certain things, whether they be positive or negative, depending on the context and your intuition here, obviously. So Naudiz converse, an example. One of the more blatant examples of Naudiz converse one might be giving would be of someone who is, thinking of cheating on a significant other. So if converse Naudiz appears in a reading that you're doing for someone on their love life, it would be, for example, in the past or issue slot. In this case, it might be an indication that the querent has felt or is currently feeling unhappy in their relationship to the point of wanting to cheat, wanting to break out, act out, as it were. But for some reason is still hesitant to call off, the relationship for whatever reason. The individual, might confess to having such feelings, and converse Naudiz will signify, depending on what your intuition tells you, that this would, for obvious reasons, not be a very good idea. It would literally mean that the querent's desires have hidden and not so hidden dangers. There's obviously a risk of them being found out by their spouse, but also that would be the obvious danger. There would also be a possibility for the person asking about their love life to start having feelings of guilt, to start having regret, doubt, shame, which are unpleasant feelings to cope with. Having a nasty secret like that is not pleasant. So, I mean, there are hidden and, well, not so hidden dangers, like I said. And obviously, down the line, they might have to confess it, which, if their partner decides to, even let them, if they haven't found out themselves yet, or if they, don't kick them out of the door immediately, and then they might have to start explaining why the person did what they did. So this is something that Naudiz converse might be signaling. So spiritually speaking, I see converse Naudiz pretty similar to how I see it in divination. It is a rune of caution. It is a warning that calls to us, like, pay attention to what you're learning, pay attention to who you're learning it from, the information that might be misleading that you're receiving, deceiving spirits, truth mixed in with lies, heinous activities with the intent to mislead and to, diminish your power in some way, shape, or form, to diminish the control you have over yourself. I also feel it is, and this goes for me just as much as for anyone else, obviously. I mean, the conclusions I've reached about these runes are just that. They're my conclusions. They're learned from other people and then adjusted to my own, gnosis, my own realizations, my own meditations, as I have mentioned several times. But to you, certain runes might mean, a little different things, and that's perfectly fine. It's they have basic meanings which you can meditate on and draw certain aspects from that appeal to you. And I have noticed from other friends who, read the runes, read the Elder Futhark in particular, certain things are attributed to different runes. For example, the next one we will be discussing is Isa, which to me, because it represents ice, represents stagnation, it represents frozen water. Frozen water doesn't flow, it stays, it stays in one place. And some people might think of Naudiz as being restricting in that sense. Like, I'm personally more of the opinion that Isa would be complete stagnation. Naudiz is restricting, but there is still movement. And certain people that I know would be a little more, free with the interchanging of those particular meanings, and that's perfectly fine. It matters to me how you read the runes and that you're consistent in your own readings and usage of these runes, you know? But I'm guessing what I'm saying here is I'm telling you these things with these videos, but obviously always use your own head, use your own, your own realizations, use your own intuition, what feels right to you, what feels a little off to you, what do you feel you can't really use. Lastly, we come to Naudiz reverse, and well, as I said, some people consider Naudiz to be reversible. I'm one of them, so that's why I'm doing this. And even if I didn't believe it, I would still do it for the sake of completion for those. So, in my personal understanding, reverse Naudiz is the most in-your-face display of the rune's essence. It is rather than just, restrained with a lesson learned. It is, to me, much more in your face, as it were. It is pain and suffering that limit and restrict you. It is a unwanted necessity that is rammed in your face, as it were. And it just won't stop until you learn the lesson, as it were. It symbolizes to me oftentimes straight up adversity. It symbolizes hostility, maybe even persecution of some kind. It, to me, feels like a teacher who uses pain as a tool of leverage so that you learn. Now, I feel it represents stuff like the purposeful lies of others to deceive you, while at the same time begging you to see the truth in their honeyed words. It teaches us to remain calm, collected, and level-headed in the face of unbridled rage. Someone who is completely pissed off at you, and you just learn to be calm and collected in the face of that. It is pain and bliss at the same time, a trial and reward at the end. It represents a situation or a person that we just cannot affect, but that we can and should learn from. We should be able to learn our own power in such situations, that even though we can't control everything, we can always control our reaction to everything, and therefore we can learn to control ourselves. Now, of course, I'm not talking about controlling ourselves in the sense of, having to adhere to a certain, religious teaching, like I said, like no sex before marriage or whatever, stuff like that. But I'm more specifically talking about not stooping to the level of the other person, or if you must be angry, do so in a manner that is fitting to the situation. Those kinds of things. So an example of Naudiz reverse to me would be a schoolyard bully or something like that. Whether they simply rejoice in hurting others or they're trying to cover up their own insecurities is kind of beside the point in this case, I feel. It's about one's own personal growth in the face of such adversity. It is about transmuting our pain, as it were, into something positive. When faced with this kind of individual, regardless of their reasons, one learns to stand up for oneself, to not let the words of others affect ourselves, or to learn to fight back if they're physically attacking you for some reason, and to no longer just stand there and take it, to take their punches. And it is, the like I said, the transmuting of the pain. It is becoming something more than you were, a braver, stronger individual in this case, someone who finally has had enough, someone who will no longer walk around with low self-esteem, someone who will no longer walk around with pain in their heart, knowing that they can finally and have finally stood up for themselves. Um, for example, this can't happen immediately while it is still happening, or it can even mean that years and years down the line, while you have been suffering from low self-esteem and you have been dealing with, the aftermath of being bullied in a mental capacity, it might represent eventually your breakthrough of going like, hey, so this happened years ago, I'm no longer in that situation, it's time to just, deal with this in an adequate, proper manner. I'm going to dive into this pain, I'm going to channel it, I'm going to transmute it, I'm going to give it a place. It happened, it no longer needs to happen, it no longer will happen. I've experienced it, I'm now better equipped to handle situations like this in the future. To me, Naudiz reversed in a spiritual meaning. It is the attack on our spirituality. It is the almost purifying assault on your beliefs, on your methods, not just on your spiritual selves actually, but also on the person that we are in the physical world. When someone doesn't like what we do, what we believe, who we are, our successes, and even our failures, through which we learn and grow. They provide us a very direct, painful, and at the same time very valuable series of lessons and growth opportunities. Because we'll come to greater understanding of not only ourselves, but of the mind of the ones who are doing these things against us. And whether it be for jealousy or because they just don't like you for whatever reason, it doesn't really matter. It's about the transmuting of your own pain, of your own adversity into something greater. It is the need and the want and the desire to grow, to evolve through pain, through adversity. It is, it is through controlled handling of a situation that we do not lose ourselves in the pain, though, because it is also a call to remain objective and calm in times of said adversity, which is another thing, another skill we should endeavor to master, because a calm and collective mind will be better able to handle and cope with it. Now, that's not to say that you should be repressing your emotions. Definitely let them out, because it's a very healthy human thing to do, but do so in a manner that you don't fly into a fit of rage and break someone's neck or something like that. It is anger has a place, just as pain does, just as happiness does. Everything has a place, and this in and of itself can actually be the lesson. That it is okay to feel angry at someone who has done you wrong with intent to do so. It is okay to protect yourself. It is okay to defend yourself. You don't have to take everything lying down. It is fine to stand up for yourself. It is fine to have pride to the degree of wanting others to respect you. When I say pride, usually I am referring to excessive pride. I would usually refer to healthy amounts of pride as having a healthy amount of self-esteem, but you get what I mean. So, it will help you if you meditate on reverse Naudiz, to transmute that pain, to channel it, to give it a place, to recognize that negativity, that quote unquote evil, if you will, has a place as well. It teaches us things. It allows us to heal certain parts of ourselves. And many people want to shy away from pain. They want to shy away from, uncomfortable things. And this is obviously very understandable. And I'm obviously also not suggesting that you dive into pain unless, you're into that. But um, it is something that is just not to be avoided when it is necessary, and that's again where need and necessity, the rune of necessity, comes in. Sometimes it's necessary to face these things, and it's never really pleasant. It's never gonna cause you happiness in and of itself, but after the ordeal is over, you will be a more powerful, stronger person if you can learn your lesson properly and channel the pain properly. And sometimes such situations can last years. It is not that I'm telling you that you should rejoice in such measures of, pain, such degrees of pain, such degree of anger or other negative emotions that reverse Naudiz might be dealing with. I'm definitely not saying that, but give it a place. That is a very healthy coping skill. So yeah, I think that concludes our video on Naudiz, the rune of necessity. I hope I managed to effectively convey what I wanted to say here. I will admit that Naudiz is a very complex rune. It is a rune that has required a lot of meditation and preparation to work with, because it is such a deep rune, and at the same time, sometimes, in my eyes at least, a little vague rune, because it has many different aspects. It always talks about restraining, about need, compulsion, all these key words that I've thrown out at the beginning. But it is always to be placed in a certain context, and it is easier to work with it in a divination setting when you're dealing with a specific question. At least that is what I have found. When I ask specific questions of the runes for someone, and Naudiz shows up, I can much easier relate it to the specific question. And if you had some difficulty understanding this video, or if you had some difficulty understanding my explanations of it, my apologies for that. I really did try my best. It is, however, much easier for all of you probably to understand from an intuitive perspective, from a rational perspective, in a particular reading, when you know what it is that the querent is asking about. So I wanted to add that on because I felt it was kind of important. So thank you all so much for listening once again. I will be endeavoring to make Isa and perhaps even Yira next week. So 1 or 2 videos within now and 7 days, and then I will be making some other videos, probably be shorter than my rune videos, and then I'll move on to the other rune after that. And yeah, so I hope you all enjoyed this video, and thank you so much. This is usually the part where YouTubers ask to like, comment, and subscribe. I never do that, but anyway, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you next time on Isa.